What is up, everybody? 10 o'clock, a late night edition. I feel like we're just finishing a late afternoon football game here. It's been a while since we went this late, but free agency has begun. A kind of a quiet day for Buffalo Bills fans and Miami Dolphins fans, but a lot to react to in the division. So I wanted to bring on Josh Tolentino from The Athletic. He covers the Miami Dolphins, a friend of the program. Going back to your days at the covering the Green Bay Packers out in Wisconsin. How are you? How's sunny Miami treating you?
Matt, Ryan, I was walking my dog this morning right before the expected craziness at noon hit, and it is 90 degrees. The weather was very good. What's the weather up there like in Buffalo this time of the year?
Felt like
sunny
14
today.
Yeah,
okay,
but
Ryan.
high of 14 though.
I was gonna lead with
out.
the sun. I was gonna lead with the sun, but all right, yeah, just cut right to our hearts. Yeah, it's cold. It's freezing. I felt like 14 degrees out. I actually was telling my wife I went for a run because it was unseasonably warm last week. So I started getting outside again and running outside. And I took a run today, man. And I told her I got up about a mile in and I kind of switched direction. So the wind was coming in my face. And I told her it was kind of good because it sped me up because I needed to get home ASAP because it was so cold and the wind chill was hitting me. So we're jealous.
Man, yeah, about like 10-minute walk with the dog is like sweating bullets. So then it's like you're immediately ready for free agency. But I don't know about you guys, but I thought it was a relatively quiet day. Obviously, the constraints of the salary cap floor being shrunk a little bit here, about 8%. And the Dolphins, they didn't make too many moves. Obviously, they've got plenty of needs, just as I think every team in the league. But in regards to their main needs, wide receiver, pass rush, no significant additions on day one.
Mm-hmm. Take us back to the last time that Bills fans I know remember, thinking about the Dolphins was that last game of the season where obviously they enjoyed themselves quite a bit, but it kind of sent them into an offseason with plenty of questions, starting at the quarterback position all the way through now that we've seen some kind of alterations that they're making to the plan that kind of set out last offseason. They moved on from Kyle Van Noy. They traded Shaq Lawson. What's kind of gone into the thinking there, and what do you think that they're setting the stage for?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to set it up, Matt, is that in week 17, any Dolphins fan, obviously the Bills fans too, they remember how ugly that loss or victory was, depending on which side you're on for the Dolphins. I mean, they were embarrassed. Obviously, Tua, the offense, they had their struggles. I think a lot of that was due to wide receiver talent and his weapons. You saw a lot of drops there by receivers who probably aren't going to be on the roster this upcoming season. But more evidently, what I really took away from that game, and I think a lot of other pundits, fans, whatever, took away from that game, the Dolphins, they finished dead last in sacks 2 years ago in 2019. This past season, they finished 11th, so that's a pretty drastic improvement. But in the biggest games, most notably Week 17 at Buffalo, a do-or-die game for both teams, really, the Dolphins, they could not pressure. It didn't matter who the quarterback was. Obviously, Josh Allen started the game. They were not able to apply pressure. I mean, that's the message that they're sending here is that Shaq Lawson, Kyle Van Noy, they decided they were expendable. Obviously, we knew they were going to add talent at wide receiver throughout this free agency. That's something they still need to do either in free agency or in the draft, and I think both aspects. But that pass rush, that linebacker spot, I think the front seven is going to look decently. I think there's going to be some turnover there. Obviously, they went out and acquired McKinney in that Shaq Lawson trade. To be honest, I liked Shaq Lawson. I thought he was a pretty good weapon. Obviously, you guys had time working with him, interacting with him, getting to know him as a player. At his value, I thought he, was pretty productive for the Dolphins at his price point. But, here the Dolphins basically said we're going to fill one need at inside linebacker.
Do we get a freeze here?
I think
Hey, you guys still there? Sorry, I think it cut off.
Yep.
Yeah. We got you back.
That, they need to add more pass rushers. Obviously, a lot we're taking off the board today, but pass rush and wide receiver are two spots they're going to need to address here moving forward.
Josh, you kind of mentioned it's a quiet day for the Dolphins, for the Bills, and I've seen a few comments already in here saying kind of disappointed the team hasn't signed anyone. It's kind of the alternate universe for you, because last year the Dolphins were one of the most aggressive teams going after Byron Jones, and we mentioned Shaq Lawson, Kyle Van Noy. Based on the fact that a lot of those faces that they signed last year are already out the door, can it be a good thing that maybe the Bills and the Dolphins are being patient this year?
Yeah, definitely. I think, obviously the biggest target left in regards to wide receiver at free agency is Kenny Galladay, who, the Dolphins are going after. I've been told multiple times by different people on both sides that there's interest between those two, but they're waiting for that second tier to see their market value, the Will Fullers, the even a guy that was just cut by the Buffalo Bills last week, and John Brown, who's from Miami. There could be interest there on both sides. So obviously they're gonna aim high, but if they don't get that Kenny Galladay, there's definitely a floor there in regards to talent that could fit this offense's needs as they move forward with their current quarterback Tua Tagovailoa.
You bring up John Brown. I think that's an interesting kind of segue here, because I think Bills fans are, they're kind of mixed in terms of what they're thinking next year in terms of wide receiver 2. A lot of people believe in Gabriel Davis. A lot of people are wondering if the Bills have the wherewithal to add another player. And one person that continues to kind of come up now as we get a couple days away from the release is John Brown. Is it a situation where he can kind of get out on the free agent market, maybe not see his value as not as high as he might have thought? And does it make sense to kind of just run it back? Or is it a situation, Ryan, where you put up a story last week when he had an interview on Sirius XM radio, and it did not sound like he was all too pleased with how things ended in Buffalo? What do you think about that fit there? First of all, on John Brown, struggles to stay healthy a little bit at times over the course of his career, was healthy in 19, obviously a couple injuries in 20, not getting any younger, but he is that over-the-top speed threat. How would he fit in there? And is that the kind of weapon that Tua Tagovailoa could really take advantage of?
Yeah, I actually listed John Brown on my top targets for the Dolphins here in free agency as the Monday began at the top of the day. I think John Brown would be a nice fit. I think obviously he brings experience. I know there's the questions about the injuries, and the Dolphins already have injury issues. Devontae Parker, he's got a string of injury issues. With those tight muscle type injuries. John Brown, though, when he is healthy, he brings that speed element. But not only that, I think in dissecting, his film, learning more about him, he kind of plays to the strengths of what Tua likes to do in the intermediate middle parts of the field. And, the Dolphins offense is going to look a bit different this upcoming season with Eric Stoodsville and George Godzill as co-offensive coordinators. They're going to bring different elements to the table, and who knows how a John Brown fits. But in regards to his strengths, I know injuries aside, that speed and attacking those middle parts of the field, that's where Tua likes to attack. He likes those tight windows. And I think John Brown's speed fits well in a potential match there.
So let's dive into a little bit. I'll let you take it from here. But I did find this list that you were looking for, Ryan, because Mike Giardi tweeted out the laundry list of moves that the Patriots have made today. Jonnu Smith, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, Matthew Judon, Henry Anderson, David Godshaw, Jalen Mills, brought back their own Carl Davis and Dietrich Wise. A lot of activity. Uncharacteristic spending. And then in New York, Carl Lawson, the big edge rush target that a lot of teams, I think, had earmarked that for their teams to hopefully go after. He goes to the Jets on a big deal. And then Corey Davis, who, could wind up being quite the addition, depending on how that works out. I'm a little bit intrigued about matching him up with Denzel Mims. But Ryan, first off, and then we'll toss it over to Josh, thoughts on just the day that the Patriots had?
Yeah, it's been a uncharacteristic day. For many, many years under the Belichick regime, we haven't seen the Dolphins spend money. It feels like Stephon Gilmore a few years ago was the first time where they really went out and they kind of went away from that targeted second-tier players, because at the time they had Tom Brady. They had a great roster intact. They didn't have to go out and attack anyone. But they've been really aggressive as of today, going out and signing, Jonnu Smith, probably one of the top 2 tight end targets in this year's free agent class with Hunter Henry, getting a lot of help on both sides of the ball. And obviously they're going to get a lot of those players that opted out last year as well. So it's going to be interesting. But Josh, what have you thought about the Patriots day so far?
Yeah, specifically with a guy that Matt mentioned, Devin Godzill. He suffered a torn biceps injury for the Dolphins like early on in the season, I think week 5 or week 6, in the middle of a contract year, and he still got decently paid by New England. I think what's most interesting, Ryan, is that Kamu Grugier-Hill, Devin Godzill, they went to the Patriots and the Texans, and then obviously there's that unique AFC East with the Patriots, but also that New England tie. Brian Flores, the Dolphins coach, he knows obviously Bill Belichick and Caserio very well. So for those not necessarily losing out to the Patriots and Caserio, but it was interesting that, these ties, both within the AFC East and, how Bill Belichick and his disciples that the Dolphins had a few guys end up going there.
One of the thing that sticks out, I know that a lot of Bills fans, tight end was the one area that if you really nitpick on this offense, and, I know everybody wants a better running game, but the one area of this offense that wasn't as productive was the tight end position. Jonnu Smith, everybody had him circled early on in the process. We had plenty of people on the show that talked about, his potential. And obviously Bill Belichick sees that, and they know something about success at that position. Rob Gronkowski has hit most of his Hall of Fame career there. I'm a little bit, the signing, first and foremost, what jumps out at you is the $30+ million in guaranteed money, which I think is quite a gamble with questions at the quarterback position. And secondly, Jonnu Smith, as productive as he has been the last 2 years and coming off of an 8-touchdown season in a run-heavy offense, very impressive stuff. For that kind of money, for me, Josh, that has to be a slam dunk. And I'm not so sure that you could sit here in March and say that it's going to be, with all the questions around in that offense and still without a number 1 wide receiver, even after some signings. Yeah,
especially at the top of the show, how we talked about how it was a mostly quiet day, and teams are sitting pat, waiting for moves to happen to basically judge the floor, judge the market. I mean, that was a splash signing when it comes to the tight end position. The Dolphins, Mike Gesicki, he's heading into a contract year. Does he use this as leverage in his performance, trying to get a contract extension mid-season as the Dolphins compete with Buffalo long-term for that top AFC East spot? Probably. So you talk about the price point, the return, obviously, we got to wait and see. I think what did plague Cam Newton last year, not just Cam Newton, but, all the Patriots quarterbacks, was their lack of weapons. They got some today, but outside of Jonnu, there weren't that top tier guys. So I still think at the end of day one, the Patriots are still, that kind of that distant third from Buffalo in that top spot in the AFC East, and then obviously Miami in number 2.
It wasn't that long ago that Bill Belichick absolutely raved about Jonnu Smith. It was the playoff matchup a few years ago where he said he does maybe the best in terms of running after the catch, and he can do everything, he can block. So maybe the signing wasn't a huge surprise based on how much Belichick seemed to like him. Could this also be a move for the future? Because obviously when it comes to young quarterbacks, something the Patriots are probably going to have to address here sooner rather than later. One of the best weapons you can have for them is a reliable tight end. So maybe is Jonnu Smith not so much for a Cam Newton in 2021 than he is for maybe, and I'm just throwing a Mac Jones out there, or some other rookie that maybe they're going to try to develop and bring along here in the near future.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, again, from the Dolphins' perspective, you look at what Devontae Parker has done, all the quarterbacks he played with the past 3 years is during the Dolphins' struggles, and he went out and earned a very hefty contract extension, and now he's playing with what they hope to be their future face of the franchise. I know everyone's talking about Deshaun Watson and where he's going to end up. 2 AFC East destinations, New York and Miami, have been linked multiple times, but Devontae Parker was a guy who played with multiple quarterbacks before ending up with a Tua, who they did have some chemistry this year. I think that Tua's obviously got to build a more comfort level with all of the receivers, Devontae Parker included. But that is a great point, Ryan, of how you find a fit with Jonnu at that position, making an impact not just with Cam Newton, but whoever that end up making their franchise quarterback here in the next over the next several months.
Obviously Miami, the closest competition in the AFC East, I still believe, even with, a lackluster first year from Tua, I expect him to take a jump. How big of a jump, we'll see. But Bills fans are going to want to be following Josh Tolentino. Let them know where they can find you and all your work.
Yeah, at JCT Sports and obviously at the Athletic, Matt, I always appreciate you and Ryan for having me come on. The Dolphins are playing catch up. We saw just how far back they are in talent, compared to the Bills. And, the Bills were playing their backups in that second half of that Week 17 game, and they were still kicking their butts. So the Dolphins have some catch up to do. And, after day one, there's still a long way to go in regards to the competition level here in the AFC East.
Awesome stuff as always, Josh. Thank you. Enjoy that weather, and we'll catch up soon.
All right. Appreciate you guys.
Take care. All right. Josh Tolentino, always super awesome with his time. We're going to hang out for a little bit and talk a little bit about this day. And, Ryan, not a lot of stuff going on from a Buffalo Bills perspective, but I think some really important stuff as we started to kind of dive into with Josh there. From a Bills perspective about what's going to happen in this division, because we always listen to Brandon Beane talk in his press conferences, and one of the first things out of his mouth when he talks about competing and earning your way towards a playoff spot is taking care of business in your division. The Bills went 6-0 last season, and to replicate that this year, I think already we're starting to see the writing on the wall that, I think the Jets and the Patriots did some things today, while very expensive, could set them up to be a little bit tougher in 2021. And you look at they're attacking the defensive side of the ball, where, if you're in a division with Josh Allen, you need to really stockpile players. And, we mentioned Carl Lawson, Gerard Davis as well, the former first-round linebacker from the Detroit Lions. He ends up with the New York Jets. And I know there might be some movement on the CJ Mosley trade, but as of now, he's still there. They're starting to pile up pieces there in New York on the defensive side of the ball. And correct me if I'm wrong, they franchise tag Marcus May. They still have Quentin Williams. There's some formidable players on that defense, and we know what Bill Belichick can probably do with the talent that he's now accumulated, Matthew Judon being at the top of that list.
Yeah, I thought Quentin Williams made a huge jump last year for the Jets, and now you throw Carl Lawson on the line with him, and things could get pretty solid there in terms of their pressure, in terms of what they can do. And obviously we saw the Dolphins be competitive this past season after going on a shopping spree 1 year ago. The Patriots are trying to close that gap. But the Bills have been there before. They've been that team that's been trying to play catch up. And you can throw money at players. You can bring in the Mario Williams of the world. You can add some really talented guys. But at the end of the day, it comes down to quarterback play. That's the reason why the Bills never caught up to the Patriots during the Tom Brady era. Brady was just always better. He was able to lead the Patriots to the division title year in, year out. So no matter what those other teams did most years, they couldn't catch that Patriots juggernaut. And right now, the Bills by far have the best quarterback in this division in Josh Allen. Tua, we don't know what Tua is just yet. To the people saying, give up on the guy, it's way too early to do that. Now, they do have to see a significant jump from him in year two. There's no doubt about that. The Jets, who knows what they're even doing at quarterback right now. Sam Darnold could get traded tomorrow, and I wouldn't be surprised. He could be there in week one, and I wouldn't be surprised. Everything's up in the air there. And then we saw Cam Newton. We saw a quarterback that played pretty well early in his time with New England. He obviously went through COVID, dealt with that, played really poorly in the second half of the season. His arm didn't look right. But there were some flashes there. But at the end of the day, none of those quarterbacks compared to what Josh Allen does and brings to this team. So as splashy as some of these signings are, I'm not sure that any of them significantly close that gap right now. Now, if one of them get that quarterback, then we're really going to be talking, or if Tua develops into that guy, we'll really be talking about a competitive AFC East here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think the pieces that have been added already in free agency, and we'll see what happens in the draft. Obviously, the Jets are going to be able to add some talent there, and the Patriots are, have pick number 15, so they probably add a potential impact player in year one, depending on which way that they go. It's going to be a tougher, trek through the division, and that's fine. I think the Bills are built for that. I think the Bills have what they have going for them is the fact that their strength is their offense. I really like the moves that, now that we've kind of been able to sit back and look at the last couple days and let things crystallize a little bit. I really like the part of this where they can go into week 1 with a potential offensive line look of Deion Dawkins, Cody Ford, Mitch Morse, John Feliciano, and Darrell Williams. Whatever you think about any one of those individual players, with a chance to let them hit the ground running with everybody healthy, if you're a Bills fan, knock on wood, and see what that looks like over the course of the first month of the season. And, having a fully healthy John Feliciano. One of the things that I think fans don't think about enough is the effect that some of these injuries have on players that linger, and, coming back, rehabbing, trying to get yourself to 100%. And we even saw when Feliciano came back, remember, he was trying to get back by the Raiders game, and Brandon Beane said everybody had to kind of dial things down a little bit for him. So I think that, you kind of also wonder, all right, how healthy was he when he got back? And he'll probably never really tell you the whole story because these guys are competitors and everything else. But, I think that the Bills definitely, stood pat with a team that I think was so far with a team that was already kind of head and shoulders above everybody else in the division. As long as the quarterback situation is the way that it is in this division, I'm not sweating it. I don't know about you, Ryan.
No, and to the fans that say, I wish the Bills would do something, they already did. They signed 2 guys that on a lot of lists were top 30 free agents, in Matt Milano and Darrell Williams. And yeah, they're their own guys, so maybe that takes a little of the excitement away from it. But that's still 2 areas that you've addressed. Your linebacker duo is going to be solid again in 2021. They've been together. They're still growing. They're going to get better each year together. What you have in Darrell Williams. But you mentioned it, this offensive line, see what they can do. Ryan Bates another year in for solid depth. There's a chance you bring back like Butker as a restricted free agent, and there's solid depth there. Trey Adams in his second year, who knows what you have there. There's still pieces that are going to get added. Brendan Beane always adds those extra pieces, but the Bills have already gone out and made some pretty significant moves. It's just been their own players. And are there still things to address? Absolutely. I've seen a lot of fans here in the chat talking about cornerback number 2. Matt, I think you and I both really like Dane Jackson, but I think we're both also realistic, saying there has to be some legitimate competition for him. You don't just want to hand a job to someone based on some flashes that you saw in his rookie year. No matter how impressive those flashes were, there needs to be that veteran presence. You still need possibly a tight end, someone to replace John Brown's speed at wide receiver. The list goes on. And obviously you still probably want to add another edge rusher into the mix too. Once they brought back Mario Addison on that restructured deal with him taking that pay cut, he's pretty much there. You're going to have Jerry Hughes. You're going to have AJ Epinesa. You'd like to bring in one other player, at least for that rotation, that can push Bam Johnson and some of these other guys for playing time. The Bills like to rotate. So still moves to be made. No one is denying that. But the Bills are in really good shape right now, to your point.
Little update here. Trey Hendrickson signs with the Bengals. So Carl Lawson goes to New York. The Bengals replace him with Hendrickson, who I know a lot of Bills fans had been talking about the last couple of weeks. I mean, had a huge breakout year last year, 13.5 sacks. And it's something I want to talk about with all these guys. I mean, Lawson, now Hendrickson, Yannick Ngakoue signing a big deal. It's a gamble. Matthew Judon to a degree as well. Bud Dupree going for a massive deal. We were talking with Nate Geary. And by the way, follow us on Twitter. Twitter Spaces is this new audio only kind of hangout initiative that the platform started. We did it one earlier tonight. It was pretty cool. What did you think of the format, Ryan? I thought it was fun.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. So I'm sitting there smiling in front of my phone like a schmuck, not knowing it was just audio. And then I'm like, okay, it took me a minute. And I'm like, okay, well, now I can just kind of sit back and relax. I really liked it, though.
I didn't know that you were waiting for that. Oh, yes. Luke mentions, when is the Nightman Bean going to strike? This one of the reasons why we wanted to do this later kind of show is in case something kind of pops here late night, we can have some instant reaction for you guys. So we'll see. We'll be on for a bit longer here, and we'll talk about some other things. But my point being on the edge rusher situation, we saw Yannick Ngakoue unhappy in Jacksonville, force his way out, get a trade in Minnesota, not produce. then force his way out of there, get a trade to Baltimore, and not produce. And I think that it's a gamble when you're a scheme fit and you your coaches spend time developing you and know your strengths and know how to put you in a position to be successful, and you produce, and then you go into a new system and, based on what they think you can do, it's a gamble at the price point that we're seeing. 15 plus million per season for these guys, 18 million for Bud Dupree coming off of that injury. This is crazy money, and I think it's too much. It's too rich for my blood, even in a normal cap year, because I think the end of the day, obviously it was a mega deal for Khalil Mack, and I look back at that situation, and the Raiders would have had to pay him a lot of money. They traded him to Chicago, but then a couple of years later, they go almost to that point for what I think is a much lesser version of what you traded away. And I think the key in this league at that position is trying to find that guy in a rookie deal. I'm not saying that that's going to be AJ Epinesa, but you got to try to do your due diligence to try to do it, because if you can land that piece, I almost think in a lot of ways that can be as disruptive of a force for your team in a division and in a conference as hitting on a quarterback can be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's interesting. I was thinking back, actually, it might have been today, earlier this afternoon, on one of our recent shows, we were talking about all the edge rushers in free agency, and there was about 15 deep, solid edge rushers. And once these guys all go and find new homes, I started thinking, maybe it's not unrealistic that the number 2 edge rusher in this draft class could fall to Buffalo at number 30. And if that happens, that might be the answer. Then you have 2 young guys in Epinesa and whoever that draft pick may be. And then you have the 2 veterans in Addison and Hughes who, the heir apparents are behind them. You can rotate them in. It was something interesting to think about because there's just so much talent there. To your point about the money, Hendrickson was one of my least favorite free agents in this year's class. And I hope he proves me wrong because I like the Bengals. I want to see the Bengals do well. That fan base kind of suffers. Kind of like what the Bills did for all those years during the drought. They have a young quarterback there. I'd like to see them put both sides of the ball together. But when I watched a lot of Hendrickson's games last year, it felt like his sacks a lot of the time came where he was cleaning up plays based on the players around him, the talent around him. And like I said, prove me wrong. I would be very happy for him and the Bengals. But it does also say something that they're willing to let Carl Lawson go to replace him with a Hendrickson. So maybe they weren't sold on Carl Lawson. And they had him for quite a few seasons. Maybe they just thought, okay, we've seen what's the best out of him. Let's try to replace it with someone we think who can be better, spend a little bit more money or similar money in that instance, and just try to get better at that position. But that's also interesting to me because they could have franchised Lawson and then worked on a long-term deal. They had other options there, but they willingly let him go. So, pass rushers, though, big gamble. Wait for those tier 2, tier 3 guys. Maybe there's someone that the Bills can just bring in for more competition there. Still a ton of talent, though, Matt, at wide receiver, and that's what intrigues me. And there's some big players out there that, okay, they didn't sign anywhere yet.
Curtis Samuel is still out there.
Indeed he is.
That was a whole funny
I like him, yeah.
Nate Geary got. So did you a little bit, too.
Well,
you saw something, right?
I think he retweeted it because I saw it. And I saw it and I'm like, oh, and I didn't look anything up on it, but I knew he was talking about because it showed up in my timeline. So when he mentioned that, I was like, oh, I did see something about that. But yeah, it was one of those fake accounts. 'Tis the season.
And crazy money for Curtis Samuel, which that's the first thing that got my ears perked because he was reading off the deal to me. He was like 4 years, 48 million or something crazy like that. And I was like, man, in a year like this where Kenny Galladay hasn't gone yet and everybody's kind of waiting, that's a pretty big jump to kind of jump in right there. So I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. But no, he's still on the market and there's plenty of wide receivers. But, to your point about the draft, go back to the 2019 draft where there was obviously it was the Nick Bosa draft. And so he goes number 2 to the 49ers. But then everything kind of gets shaken up and it's like, Kellen Farrell goes at number 4 to the Raiders. God knows why. Josh Allen goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then Rashawn Gary goes to the Packers. And Brian Burns, who ended up being, for my money, probably the number 2 pass rusher and has a chance to, depending on how Nick Bosa bounces back. I mean, he's been really good the last 2 years, and he's the 4th or 5th guy off the board. And in a class where the defensive end isn't as strong, to your point, yeah, if a Gregory Rousseau from Michigan falls to that spot, man, that's one of those things where you probably jump off your chair and run to the thing, because you don't get that opportunity too often where maybe you get the 1 or 2 best edge rusher in a draft.
No, and just like any other draft, there's going to be 3 or 4 quarterbacks that go in round 1. This is another really deep wide receiver draft, but it's top heavy just like last year. So there's going to be 3, 4, 5 wide receivers that go. That Kyle Pitts is going early, some offensive linemen. So it's not unrealistic to think that the number 2, number 3 edge rusher could fall to number 30. And if number 1 or number 2 on Buffalo's board is still there at 24, 25, who's to say that Brendan Bean does not move up for that player? We've seen him be aggressive. 30 to 24, 30 to 25, he wouldn't have to be too aggressive there. But if his guy is there on the board and he's standing out on Buffalo's draft board and it addresses a major need, I could see that happening. Now, I'm not saying he's going to move up from 30 to 10, 30 to 15, but low, mid-20s, I could absolutely see that happening to get his guy.
What do you think was the most impactful move in the division today? Let's open it up to just that.
Okay. Yeah. I thought you were going to go overall, and I had my answer ready.
Oh, well, hit us with that first, and then we'll work our way back. If you guys have any questions, drop them in the chat. We'll talk about anything you want. I saw some running back conversation. We could definitely hit on that as well, but let's see where this goes.
Yeah, big winner for me today is the Chargers. Maybe one of the toughest divisions in the NFL. Obviously, any division that has the Chiefs in it's one of the toughest. But they went out and they added Lindsley today, and they also added Filer, 2 offensive linemen who are going to be day 1 starters there for the Chargers. You have a young franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert who you believe in. You have some talent there on offense already besides Herbert in some of those running backs, some of those wide receivers, and Hunter Henry, who is still out there right now, spoke to TMZ recently, a day or 2 ago, in fact, and said, I'm not ruling out returning to the Chargers. I love Justin Herbert. So if there's not that market for him and he returns there, now you have some stud offensive linemen, one of the best centers in the league. That offense has even more promise now. So I thought they were the overall big winners of the day. I actually had the Bengals as the big losers for missing out on those offensive linemen and not really doing much, and losing Carl Lawson too on the other side. But at least now they address Hendrickson. Within the division, though, going back to your original question, I think it would have to be Jonnu Smith. Obviously, he still has to prove himself a little bit. That was a high amount of money that he earned and received. I think he's the number 3 tight end now in the league in terms of salary.
Which is crazy, right? Because I don't know if I'm ready to even entertain the idea of putting him in the class of a George Kittle and Travis Kelce. And he's got more guarantee in his current deal, guarantee money, than Travis Kelce has in his. And I know Travis Kelce is a little bit older, no doubt about it. But if we're talking about production, I mean, I'm buying into the next 4 years of Travis Kelce before I'm buying into the next 4 years of Jonnu Smith. It's just me.
Yeah, no, and I agree. But if you looked at the Patriots last year, they had a boatload of problems. Don't get me wrong. But the one area where they really struggled was at the tight end position. That was, you've mentioned it today. I've mentioned it. Rob Gronkowski, for so many years, carried the load there at tight end. And then they'd have a quality number 2 tight end, a veteran that could also come in and contribute there, here and there. That was always a big part of their offense with Tom Brady. Last year, they drafted 2 rookies who contributed nothing. Their veterans did nothing. They were lost. So at least with Jonnu Smith, I'm not sure he'll play up to that salary. Don't get me wrong. But he helps Bill Belichick, and he helps Josh McDaniels in terms of what he likes to do offensively, because now you actually do have a weapon there, a threat there, someone that is good with the ball in his hands after the catch in terms of creating and making things happen, someone who can block. You know how much they like those all-around tight ends, because Gronkowski developed into one of those all-around tight ends, can block, can catch, can run after the catch. That's what they have in a Jonnu Smith. Now, will he live up to that contract? Who knows? But in terms of impact, that's my number 1 signing in the division today.
I'll go a little bit different direction just because, just let's spruce it up a little bit. I think Corey Davis low key has the chance to be. And let me tell you why. The first thing you see when you see the deal and the guaranteed money, I mean, they paid Corey Davis, the New York Jets did. He was the number 2 receiver for former first-round pick of the Tennessee Titans. And, kind of had a nice situation there. It allowed him to kind of be the Robin to what I think A.J. Brown had become the Batman. But they kind of shared the load this last season. I think both of them were pretty good. 3 years, $37.5 million for Corey Davis, which – at first glance, that's a lot of money. And, they went out and they brought in Brashad Perriman last year. $27 million of that is guaranteed. I think this is a much more significant move, obviously. But he's also a number 2. So you start to think, okay, well, number 2 receiver, number 1 money. I don't know if that completely makes sense. But then you start to think about what kind of weapons they already have in place there. I think Denzel Mims has that really high ceiling of potential. I remember, being back in Indianapolis last year, the last normal event that we had. And I remember having some conversations with people saying, listen, we think Denzel Mims could be a guy that pops in this draft, big time. So we'll see. He's got size. I think he's kind of like that, really nice young number 2 option. And I think Corey Davis has done enough in Tennessee to maybe take that one, almost what John Brown was when he first got to Buffalo.
Just going to mention it.
Yes, he was a 1, but he's not really a 1. And I think together they can create some nice things if they can figure out the quarterback, which is a whole other conversation. Don't forget also they have Chris Herndon there, Ryan, which I think there's always been this hope for Chris Herndon to break out. He's had injuries and he's had off the field issues and all this other stuff. I'm so interested to see the next part of this is going to be, I put this on hold until May 1st because I want to see what they do in the draft. If they stick with Sam Darnold, I'm more bullish on that trio than I will be if they go for a rookie quarterback. What are your thoughts on all of that, I guess?
Well, starting with the wide receivers, I was really high in Denzel Mims coming out. I was actually intrigued last year when Buffalo met with him on Zoom, and it was after the Stephon Diggs trade. And, it was a deep wide receiver class. They obviously eventually addressed that with Gabriel Davis, who panned out in a huge way. He was outstanding, especially where they were able to get him. But Mims, I loved his game. I thought he flashed at times the last time where, Perriman had his moments, but they didn't have anywhere close to a number 1 wide receiver. And I thought Mims stepped up and played well given the circumstances. So I think that a Corey Davis, despite being more of a traditional number 2 wide receiver, is going to help him out significantly. Mims, that is, in terms of who's covering him, matchups, things like that. And then if he ends up being their number 1 wide receiver, well, then that frees up Corey Davis, who we know can be a number 2 wide receiver. He flashed in that game against Buffalo last year. He's flashed at times in his career. He was a very high draft pick, obviously, for the Titans when they selected him. So there's still hope there too. But yeah, now if I'm a Jets fan, my full attention turns to the quarterback situation. I like Sam Darnold. I think he can still be salvaged. I think he can still be a good quarterback. I'm just not sure it can be with the Jets. I think that if you can get a day 2 pick for him and something else, do it. Go and then take who you think is the number 2 quarterback in this draft class. They have scouts. They have high personnel. It's up to them to pick the right guy, whether they think that's Zach Wilson, whether they think that's Justin Fields, whether they think that's Trey Lance. I highly doubt it would be Mac Jones in that class of, in terms of being quarterback number 2. But maybe if you have some of those guys close, trade back a little bit and then take, if you feel comfortable that one of those 2 guys will be there that you're high on. That's the next move for the Jets in terms of closing the gap in the AFC East, because it doesn't matter who they sign right now. There's still that significant gap roster-wise, but that can shrink insignificantly if they get the right signal caller.
I want to shift the gears to the edge rusher a little bit, because I think one question, I think I saw it out on social media, and it's a pertinent one for in here as well, is Dan Graziano.
I'm looking it up. Yeah, looking it up right now.
Let's get that up here because we can dive into that conversation, which is a juicy one. That we might have to stay up a little bit later, Ryan. We might have to stay on and keep talking until maybe there's a something that comes out here. Cleveland got the safety it needed, and they're still okay.
Oh, boy. Okay, fine. Yeah. Bills seem like they're just trying to bring back the great team they had last year, though tight end is a spot where I believe they are trying to add. So he's responding to a lot of fans about a lot of teams, so I had to go down quite a bit there. It was only 8 minutes ago, but he's responding about every team. So, not to run it back on tight ends, Hunter Henry's still out there. Would he take a 1-year deal to come to Buffalo? Or maybe, actually, you know what? It probably wouldn't be a 1-year deal. It'd probably be multiple years where he'd have a low cap hit in 2021. Is he willing to do that, play ball a little bit if Buffalo thinks he can be healthy and be a difference maker? Because when healthy, you could talk about him from a talent standpoint being in the upper echelon of tight ends. Is it a Dan Arnold, someone that you and I have talked about extensively? Is it a veteran?
Let me ask you about that, because if money is not an issue, right? Gerald Everett versus Dan Arnold, because I know that you're super high on Arnold. Where do you fall out on that? Because I think from a passing game perspective, I think Everett, I might give him the small. I love the traits and the size of an Arnold, but I like the proven playmaking ability of an Everett. Where do you land on that?
I'm not going to sit here and act like I've watched every Gerald Everett game, but I've seen flashes of superstardom and then major like where he just disappears at times, or he's not a factor. And I feel like, and I know you said price point doesn't matter. I just feel like he's going to make significantly more than Arnold, and maybe I'll be proven wrong on that. And I think maybe we know what his ceiling is. He kind of reminds me a little bit of a more polished Dawson Knox. He makes these wow plays. He really impresses you. But then at times he's like, where is this guy? He's not really being featured in our offense. He's not doing much. Mm-hmm. Dan Arnold was not a big part of the Cardinals offense last season, yet he really flashed when they did get him the ball. He made the most of his opportunities. I think if you could get him in an offense where the tight end is more of a focal point. Now, is that Buffalo? I'm going all over the place here, but Buffalo's never really included the tight end in my lifetime. I'd have to probably go back to the Jay Reamersma days. But if they're going to make a concerted effort to involve the tight end, I would like to see a Dan Arnold in here. So it's going to be interesting. There's obviously veterans we can talk about too. If you're talking again, Kyle Rudolph, we've mentioned many times, Jared Cook, who, I know some fans are like, he's old, I don't want him in here. There's something to be said about a veteran presence, someone who is solid still despite his age. So there's options out there. It's just going to come down to the Bills being patient and finding someone at that right price point that I think can be a contributor to this team.
I'm going over some tight end numbers on Pro Football Focus. Just trying to kind of collect my thoughts here on the tight end position. Jason Kroom, 2020, 1 target, 1 reception, 1 touchdown for the Philadelphia Eagles. The 14th highest graded receiving grade on Pro Football Focus if you take out the filter on snap count. Isn't that just so funny? And you look at some other players. Obviously, we've talked about Logan Thomas a little bit and the success that he's gone on to have in Washington. Good for him. Great story that he has. But, I kind of look at, like, you're right on Everett, because I think the problem that you find in the Rams offense with Cooper Kupp and, before when it was Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods and who was there? Tyler Higbee, all these playmakers in their offense. I think the more those numbers kind of catapult up, you can have guys that kind of get lost for a while. And I think it can help you in a lot of ways because it can keep contract numbers down because, stats production is not always at a super high level across the board because there's only so many balls to go around. But I think that that's a great point. And you look at, okay, what's the alternative there? Do you consider maybe a 1-year, see how much he's got left deal for Jared Cook, who still had 8 touchdowns with the Saints last year? I'm not necessarily sure he's a scheme fit. And, I've read a little bit about that and maybe that's an issue, and you also don't want to take more opportunities away from Dawson Knox. So it's almost like a catch-22 here. If you're Brandon Beane, you might be screwed depending on either way that you go, whether you bring somebody in or you don't.
Yeah, I mean, you could end up stunting his growth, but you could also end up maybe having the wrong guy. Maybe Knox isn't the guy. I love his skill set. I love his traits. I love his athleticism. But who's to say that all comes together? We've seen many talented players who meet all those physical traits, but they don't ever put it all together on both sides of the ball. So, we can't sit here and say for sure, Dawson Knox just needs another year or two, and then it's all going to come together. We can hope that, we can think that it's a possibility, because I genuinely think it is a legitimate possibility. But at the same time, you want to also have someone that can come in here this year, push Dawson Knox, teach Dawson Knox, and maybe be a red zone threat for the Bills. Maybe that is the goal of what they're looking for. We'll try to get you the ball in the regular passing game, but down inside the 20, inside the red zone, that's where we're really going to target you. That's where it's going to come in, and you're going to be a big factor for this team. So it's going to be interesting to see who they sign, if they sign someone here in the near future.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see where they go if they do spend some free agent dollars. Obviously, we mentioned the Graziano report on tight end. I still think the defensive line is an area where, but at the same time, you start thinking about the numbers and what they have on the roster and the contributions that Daryl Johnson gives on special teams, and you wonder if they're not just okay with maybe coming back and hoping for the jump from AJ Epinesa. They gave they restructured Mario Addison. They're obviously bringing him back. He's a part of the plan. And, this transitions kind of right into what I wanted to talk about before we got into tight end, and maybe we'll wrap up there because, we realistically could be sitting here thinking Thursday and still not have a move done by Brandon Beane, because, this could be a long play, not only for the league, but for the Bills especially. What are your thoughts on a Carlos Dunlap? Because he's a guy that, similarly to Addison, is getting older. A lot of his really good production years, we're a couple years removed from it. That 13 sack season, I think 4 years ago, and he's been up close to 10 the last couple. But you wonder, when it goes for a pass rusher, it goes. And if you add a guy like Carlos Dunlap, even on a nice contract number, if he's not going to come in here and bring the kind of production that, you remember Carlos Dunlap being able to produce, I'm not so sure if that's the move. And I think that's why I definitely veer more towards a Jadeveon Clowney, where I think you go into that from the start knowing that the sack production is not something where that's going to be your barometer for success. It's more about what he can do in the run game and in setting the edge, which I think is something where against a Patrick Mahomes, if that's what you have to beat, if that's the kind of guy that you got to take care of, we saw it last year when he gets outside the pocket, it's game over a lot of the time. So adding a guy like Jadeveon Clowney to me at the price point that it'll likely come with, it's intriguing.
Yeah, that's definitely intriguing. I will say, to Dunlap's credit, I thought that when he was traded to Seattle, he played some of his best football. He stood out quite a bit when he was playing against the Bills, specifically when the Bills played against the Seahawks. So there's something to be said about that. But then you look at that defensive end room. You're taking away snaps from AJ Epinesa in some way, shape, or form if you bring in another player like Carlos Dunlap. And then I'm okay with taking snaps away from Epinesa if it's a younger player, someone that you think can be their long-term opposite him at some point. But if you already have Jerry Hughes and you already have Mario Addison, two guys who aren't going to be around much longer, and then you added Dunlap, someone else whose career is going to be over sooner rather than later, you're not setting yourself up for success in the future. And that's what I want to see. I want someone that still has some upside, still has some better years in front of them, where maybe when Jerry Hughes walks away and goes somewhere else or retires, or Mario Addison goes somewhere else and retires, you have that player already on your roster that can contribute. You're rolling the dice and you're playing a risky game when you have three guys that are that old already, and you're depending on them to contribute, obviously, in 2021, but also maybe beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Plenty more to get into as we move through the free agency week. I have a feeling that we might do a couple of these. I've been talking to a couple folks in the market that might be able to jump on with us as we react to any news as we move closer towards Wednesday. So we'll cut it off there. And hey, you know what? Even if one of us falls asleep, maybe the other, if something really pops later this evening, we will have your back and get something out. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow probably with something more. For Ryan Talbot, I am Matt Parrino. Hope you enjoyed this. Just some reaction. A busy day in the AFC East, even if it wasn't for the Bills. We wanted to talk through some of that, and we'll get a more clearer picture as this thing moves along, and we see if the Patriots, or the Dolphins, who are obviously from what Josh was talking about, chasing that wide receiver. We'll see what happens there. We'll see you soon. Take care. Enjoy free agency. The buzz only lasts one week a year. All right. Take care, everyone.